Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to How I Would Make It, the show in which I have the difficult task of suggesting fan edits for popular movies, TV shows, video games, etc. It is a hard task, but someone has to do it. May as well be me. Man, that movie sucks. Well, let's get things rolling with today's subject, Spider-Man 3.
Spider-Man 3, the final movie in the Sam Raimi trilogy, came out in 2007 to mixed reviews, despite the critical success of the previous two installments. While some praised the epic scope of the film, viewers like me thought that the film was clustered and schizophrenic due to the number of characters and storylines that the film tried to cover in just 2 hours. While Sam Raimi's ambition is to be applauded, this is a good instance in which the theory did not translate into practice.
Let's take a look at all the good stuff in the movie first, because while there is quite a bit of bad stuff that drags the movie down as a whole, all of the good stuff in this movie is great. And, as always,
spoilers abound! The relationship between Mary Jane and the memory-deprived Harry develops at a great pace despite only lasting for a few scenes. Having MJ move away from Peter towards Harry shows a great source of conflict between our two romantic leads, and shows the audience how much Peter is screwing up, rather than telling us. Also, Sam Raimi has always been visionary in terms of special effects, and it's amazing how well the CGI and practical effects blend together in several scenes. I mean, the man hired an athletic amputee to pull off the effect in which Spider-Man punches through Sandman. And Bruce Campbell's cameo in this movie is great, because as always, he steals the show despite the short amount of time he's actually in the movie, just by being the most interesting guy on screen.
just goes to show you how much truth there is in the old saying, you know what they say about a man with a huge chin? He's Bruce Campbell.
Oh, that sucks.
Now it's time to discuss my main issues with this movie. And while the problems do come from all over the place, generally they boil down into 3 distinct problems. Emo Peter Parker, too many characters, and a distinct lack of venom. Let's do this!
Everyone knows how dumb the idea of Emo Peter was, but this is a discussion we need to have in order to clarify why it failed. Having the hero of a story become a dark version of himself is an old story device, and while some stories can use it effectively to create tension, it only works when we see the dark version as a threat that needs to be purified. We get to see a main protagonist turning against their own ideals, and since it's oftentimes the main character, we get to see the most powerful character turning their strength against friends, so it becomes an almost tragic situation.
In the case of Spider-Man 3, this dark version isn't threatening at all, because rather than appear menacing, Emo Peter Parker just looks embarrassing.
When I first saw Spider-Man 3, I remember everyone in the audience laughing when Peter pulled his hair down into his face, because it's so unnatural and awkward, and that's exactly the wrong way to go. Combine that with the shopping montage and the spider dance, and you have a parody of character change, rather than something that the audience is supposed to be worried about. Hitting Mary Jane was a well-needed character moment to show how far Peter had fallen, but it shouldn't have been in that outfit.
Looks like one of the drawbacks to the symbiote is that Peter Parker discovered Dashboard Confessional.
Hope dangles on a string like slow spinning redemption.
Poopy.
This movie also had the problem in which too little time had to be spread across too many characters, resulting in shallow, unfulfilling storylines throughout the film. While there were quite a few characters on which to fix the blame, the biggest target is Flint Marko, aka Sandman, whom Sam Raimi chose because he is visually interesting, ignoring the fact that the character is completely unimportant in the history of Spider-Man comics, and thus anything unique or important about the character had to be created specifically for the film.
Now, while a new backstory can be worked in by a great screenwriter, in this case it shouldn't have been done because Sandman's backstory takes away from Peter Parker's reason for being a superhero, his responsibility in Uncle Ben's death.
Marco was the one who shot and killed Uncle Ben, not the criminal who Peter let escape. So even if Peter had acted, Uncle Ben could still have died. I know it can be argued that Marco only killed Uncle Ben because he was startled by his accomplice, but it doesn't take away from the fact that another variable has been added, removing some of the blame from Peter, and thus the responsibility.
Responsibility. Get it? Like with great power comes great responsibility? Huh?
Oh, that sucks.
Finally, of all the characters who should have been the main focus of the movie, none was more shunned than Venom, the character with literally the closest connection to Spider-Man, and without whom the main crux of the story could not have happened, since the symbiote personifies the dark side of Peter. Eddie Brock, the human half of Venom, is not introduced in the movie until 30 minutes in, a quarter of the way through the movie. For a main villain, that means the rest of his story will have to be rushed, since he had a late start, and he still has to share screen time with everyone else.
Perhaps I'm biased, since Venom was the villain who I most wanted to see when I learned they were making Spider-Man movies. But he is a natural choice for the main villain, especially in the third part of a trilogy. He has powers perfectly suited to beating Spider-Man. I mean, he can't be detected by Peter Parker's Spider-sense, and he still has similar powers to Spider-Man. His own version of web-slinging, super strength, agility, etc. He's also supposed to be a dark, mirrored version of Spider-Man, focusing on strength and brutality, rather than agility and gymnastics, which is why he's normally depicted as a muscle-bound brute. So how did we get from this...
Crush you like a worm!
to this?
Jackie's good for gas money.
You are such a whore.
I have nothing against Topher Grace, and I'm sure he's a nice guy, but this was not the role for him. If he had stayed in the symbiote mask the whole time, it would be fine. But the symbiote keeps peeling back to reveal his face, which is not what the audience wants to see. We want to see Venom!
Alright, I've laid out my grievances against this movie. I have listed my reasons for why these are bad, and if you're still watching, then you want to know how I'm going to fix all of these problems with my master plan. Well, dear viewer, I shall not disappoint. Prepare for the magic! I can't actually do magic tricks, so you're gonna have to settle for this jump cut.
For emo Spidey, the solution to this would be as simple as changing from an emo character to a charming yet arrogant asshole. Something along the lines of the fake persona that Bruce Wayne uses in Nolan's Batman movies. He's an asshole, he's arrogant, and he supposedly goes through women like disposable napkins, but he's a charming guy who women want, until they get to know him. Peter Parker is a sweet guy, but he's not great with women. Making him a charming asshole still changes his character, but he also gains an inherent sense of violence, since someone who doesn't care about people has no problems being violent.
I just combined Batman and Spider-Man. My two favorite superheroes. Man, I bet no one has ever done that before. Crap.
The problem of too many characters is one that is also easily solved, since all you have to do is pick which ones to cut. For me, Captain and Gwen Stacy are the first to go, since if you aren't going to follow through on the storylines which made them famous in the comics, why bother? Several pretty girls could substitute for Gwen Stacy and achieve the same result. Also, Sandman is a definite drop. since his plot ruins Peter's original reason for being a superhero, and he has no other bearing on the story other than screwing up the origin of Spider-Man. That gives the screenwriter quite a chunk of time freed up that can be spent on furthering the important characters.
Which leads me to my ideas for fixing Venom, which are many, but for the sake of brevity, I will only focus on my main ideas. Because we not only need to see Harry as the new Goblin storyline, as well as seeing Peter find, use, and discard the alien symbiote, introducing Eddie Brock is going to be one hell of a trick, and even I don't know how to pull that off. So while I can hear the torches being lit and the pitchforks being sharpened preemptively, I propose that perhaps it's too late to bring in Eddie Brock as a fully fleshed out character. Maybe we should look for another character who already hates Peter. Someone like Mary Jane's fiancé from Spider-Man 2.
He already has reason to hate Peter, since Peter stole back Mary Jane's heart, and thus humiliated Jameson on his wedding day. Also, he is an astronaut, with a reason to be in space, so maybe the symbiote could attach to his shuttle during a collision with space debris, and come back to Earth that way. The collision could cause an emergency landing, in which Spider-Man has to save Jameson Jr., during which some of the symbiote could get onto Spidey's costume, while a part stays and bonds with Jameson. This would set up a fight at about the halfway point when Jameson and Peter get into a fight over Mary Jane, with the symbiotes fueling each combatant. Jameson could be at the church when Peter finally frees himself of the symbiote, and thus still become the hulking Venom. The symbiote would then feed on Jameson's rage, tell him who Spider-Man is, and instruct him on how to initiate revenge, by using the symbiote's crashed transport to summon more symbiotes from the home planet. Remember, the Spider-Man movies have up to this point been pretty cheesy with their science, so a few more moments will fit in. This would allow for a big fight to still happen, in which Harry Osborn can still fulfill the same role as before, as well as set up a round 2 for Jameson and Peter, Spider-Man and Venom, now both symbolically in costume. Spidey would win, of course, Harry would still sacrifice himself, and Jameson would be killed by his own stupidity, as is tradition in the Spider-Man movies, and everyone goes home and gives this movie the highest ratings possible. I would win an Academy Award, and Kirsten Dunst would want to kiss me upside down, and...
Sorry, lost myself in grandeur there for a minute. Kirsten, call me. Well, that about wraps it up for this episode, so thank you again for watching. And feel free to leave comments below telling me what you thought of the episode, and if you have suggestions for future episodes. But until that time, this is Tyro signing off. Bye-bye!
Whose eyes am I behind?